All right. I believe we are live. And if you are out there in YouTube land and you can hear us, please let us know. Yeah, we'd love to give a huge welcome to Alexander Macris, who is joining us for an interview, who's kind enough to stop by.
Yeah. Part of his world tour, his ACKS II world tour.
The ACKS tour, the victory lap on this massive, massive success and well-deserved success on this Kickstarter for a very incredible game. So thank you very much for joining us. And thank you so much for at the last second adding the poplar wood slipcase, as I am very happy to have upgraded my pledge to include it.
That's right.
How else will you fit your books at the
yeah, where are they going to fit?
Where are they going to fit?
Where are they?
Where else would they fit? Yeah, and you don't want them to be sad, like they're going to lay. Right. I've heard that a lot of my friends have a slipcase. You know, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, guys. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Much obliged.
So yeah, we've got a whole bunch of questions. If you guys are listening to this, we are going to be taking questions from the audience, possibly at the end if we have time, but we have a lot of questions. So
which we may not get to all of them.
Yeah, we may not.
We'll see.
May not get to all of them. But I think we can get started. Something we've been kind of thinking about since you've been on a lot of shows, and people have asked some really insightful questions, is that I haven't seen much discussed about the actual setting of Adventurer Conqueror King.
And it seems really interesting.
Yeah,
from what you've hinted at.
It seems really cool. And the kind of first question before we get into like the details is like, can you give kind of a high level overview of the setting and like what genre is this game trying to simulate?
Sure. All right. So, I mean, the first thing I should say is that at least 50%, if not more, of the ACKS player base plays in their own campaign worlds. So, like Dungeons and Dragons or Traveler, like it has a campaign setting, but it isn't intrinsically linked to that campaign setting in the same way that like Shadowrun or Numenera are linked to their campaign setting. Okay. So with that caveat, the campaign setting of ACKS is called the Auran Empire campaign setting. It's inspired by the crisis of the 3rd century AD, which led to the fall of the Roman Empire. The setting is based basically around a reverse Mediterranean. The Auran Empire was once the most powerful force in the area. It remains the superpower, but its power is weakening. It's lost its northern provinces. It's lost its western provinces. A nomadic group called the Skysos has begun to invade from the west. And the Kingdom of Cimmeria has an alliance with the Auran Empire and begs them for aid against the Skysos menace. And so the Auran Emperor has led the legions of Aura off to go battle the Skysos. And then nobody knows what happened to him. So back in the east, all of the garrisons have been depleted. The border forts are only partially manned. Nobody really knows who's in charge. They don't know if the Emperor is alive or not. You know, they're even communing with the gods and they're not getting an answer on it. And then to the south, in an area called the Waste, obviously a great evil is beginning to awaken. So that's like the setup for the setting. So it's designed to be a setting where players can simultaneously feel heroic, but can also go ahead and sort of conquer their opponents and see them driven before them and hear the lamentations of their women. I discovered when I was sort of building the whole thing up that a lot of players don't like to just conquer for the sake of conquering the way Alexander the Great did or Genghis Khan did, right? Like they need to feel like I'm doing it for a reason.
Yeah.
And so the empire is set up such that, you know, the good emperor who wanted to do the right thing is gone. Nobody knows where he is. The empire is falling apart. The people that stayed behind were the cravens, the cowards, the dastardly people who were trying to manipulate things behind the scenes. They're caught up in their own petty games about who's going to be the new emperor. And so when this great evil comes, the player's like, well, we just have to take over. It's the only choice.
Very cool.
Yeah. So
there's like this kind of like rot, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's
very
go ahead.
Very Tecumel with the different heirs of the emperor squabbling, fighting, warring against each other in some cases for ascendancy.
That's right. That's right. Which was exactly what would happen every time an emperor died in Rome, right? Same exact thing. And, so you've got that set up. And then metaphysically, there's this, there's two main religions in the world, the Empyrean religion and the Chthonic religion. And they have different, views on the afterlife, different views on salvation. But the Chthonic religion has a belief in a time called the Awakening, which is when the Chthonic gods will awaken and the dead will rise, and they will reclaim all that has been taken from them by the Auran Empire. And so you have kind of like this looming. So there's like the empire is rotting, and just on a temporal and material plane, things are in a bad way. And then you have like this rising spiritual sorceress element as well. So similar to, I would suppose, Game of Thrones, in that you have, the menace coming from the north, the White Walkers, and then you also have the fact that the Seven Kingdoms are falling apart.
Right.
In terms of genre, it's like sword and sorcery, sword and sandals.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's a lot of opportunity there then for, you have kind of built-in adventures. You have this rot in the empire, multiple factions competing for power that you can get kind of caught up in if you're assuming you're interacting with them, if you're not, out in the wilderness somewhere. And there's, because that is something that we've talked about with games that we really like, is having some sort of engine of internal conflict that just the world has on its own.
Yeah. Right.
That can tend to make players get involved, or they can't help but get involved.
Any character that exists in this world by virtue of the world, in absence of anything else, will still create drama, will still create engaging, interesting, dangerous situations that they'll have to contend with.
Things that you have to do.
Things to do. Or you're going to die.
Yeah, you're going to die.
One way or another.
So there's I've run the Auran Empire a bunch of times as a campaign, kind of, and the groups have responded in very different ways. Like, I've known groups that have essentially just been, rogues and bad dudes, and they've just seen it as an opportunity to knife others in the back and get ahead. And I've seen people, be pretty bloody minded about just taking over and damn the consequences. And then, of course, I had one group that, went all the way to become the theocrats of Ara, and then they went and conquered the moon.
Nice.
So, like, it just, it really depends. But the threats at the existential level don't so much kill the players directly as they just kind of destroy the world and make it a place you don't want to live. So it's kind of like, do you want to live in a dark age in 1,000 years of night? Probably not, but maybe you do, right? Maybe you're like, hey, I'm just going to go undead and become a black mage. And like,
you have to respect my agency.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So, I mean, this brings to mind a question. I'm just going to jump around.
Yeah.
You're mentioning different groups having very different ambitions and interacting with the empire and with the setting in very different ways. Broadly speaking, just to give a base level understanding of like a lower level character existing in the world, how do most people at that level view the empire or relate to the empire on like a day-to-day basis? Is this something, are they and the institutions this sort of far away, distant thing that they, the empire exists and there is an emperor, but he doesn't really affect us?
I'm not going to see him.
I'm not going to see him, or are things so bad on the borderlands that I really dislike the empire because they haven't maintained the roads, their garrisons are empty or poorly supplied, and we're getting raids from these sort of mundane and or supernatural threats encroaching in, and I need to act because the empire won't.
So most of the time, I would say most of the NPCs at the low level, the levels of the commoners and things like that, as well as most of the player characters, tend to view the empire initially when they start the game as generally a force for good, but one that's seen better days. But they believe that it's not going anywhere. We've had ups and downs in the past, and this too shall pass. And there's a sense of unease because, the forts really have kind of been empty and the roads have gotten a bit more dangerous. But I mean, I would imagine it's actually not too dissimilar to how like a contemporary American feels when they're like, man, crime is really up. Inflation's been kind of rough. I'm a little worried about the direction of the company. But, but they're not, the average American isn't sitting around and thinking like, in 8 years, there's going to be a solar flare that will destroy America as we know it, right?
Well, some people are maybe concerned about other things related to heat and the planet.
Sure.
Life at some point.
Yeah, no, there are some. Yeah.
But not
most
common.
People,
yeah,
not common. Yeah, exactly. And so that is general. And I should mention, I created the Auran Empire setting when I was in a time of my life of profound depression.
Mm-hmm.
The 2008 recession had just hit, and it blew up all of the plans I had for the Escapist, which we were about to be sold to Condé Nast to become part of Wired Digital, and that blew up on me, and we lost everything. My wife had just become diagnosed with a chronic and disabling illness, and it just, and it felt the Great Recession hit really hard. It felt like the country was falling apart. It felt like my life was falling apart, and so there's this undertone of desperation and despair kind of that underlies the whole setting. Like, things are not getting better. Things are getting worse, and you have to do something about it because that's how I felt when I made it.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
I'm glad your life is not
I don't like that,
anymore,
but
no,
as a dramatic instrument.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
as an inspiration for the tone and feel of a game. I mean, that absolutely makes sense. I do have another question jumping around because you said something earlier about the two main religions. We actually wanted to know, can you give us an overview of the cosmology of the world? And
yeah, sure.
Is this the kind of fantasy world where gods interact with people? Like, would they appear to their followers, or are they more abstract?
So in the myths of the peoples, they have appeared, but for instance, when you cast a commune spell, you're actually speaking to an angel or emissary or herald, right?
Okay.
You can summon a powerful demon, but you can't summon a chthonic god. You can summon a herald angel, you can't summon a god. But that said, there's really no one really questions that they exist. And so again, it's set in this period inspired by late antiquity. And in late antiquity, everybody had a notion that all the gods were real, but they were all pretty much the same. So Amun was obviously just Ra, who was also Zeus, and they were all the same dude. And Aphrodite was obviously Venus, who was actually Ishtar, who was obviously Isis, and they were the same chick. And so you had these syncretic religions. So what I did is I said, let's create two pantheons. There's the Empyrean pantheon and the Chthonic pantheon, which was inspired by how the Greeks divided their gods between the Olympian and the Chthonic gods. The Empyrean gods are the gods of law. They're said to dwell on Mount Adoramus, the holy mountain. And there's 7 in number. There's Aminar, who is the god of law and light. Taurus, who's the god of strength and honor. Iana, who's the goddess of love and war. Mitiara, who's the goddess of peace and duty and healing. Califa, who's the goddess of fate, fortune, death, wills, trusts, and estates. And Narvis, the god of travel, winds, and nature. So those are your Empyrean gods. And then the Chthonic side, there's many more gods, and they're less sort of tightly coupled. But the main ones that people tend to interact with are Iskara, who's the mother of monsters, Nazga, who's the queen of beauty and pain, Telith, the earth mother, Lamala, the sea mother, Durgion, the doom lord, who's the god of undead. Okay, so the main difference in the two religions is their view on is twofold. The Empyrean religion teaches that when you die, if you have been a great hero or a saint, then you become exalted or deified and you ascend up to the Empyrean heaven. And so they have a cult of heroes or saints or deified emperors, just like the Romans and the early Christians did. And if you don't ascend, then you go to the path of rebirth. So there's the path of ascension and the path of rebirth. And this is almost entirely accurate to what like the middle Platonists of this time period believed. It's kind of inspired by real life doctrine in that regard. So they don't really fear death. If you're a devout Empyrean, like worst case, you're going to live again. And if you die, but if you die really gloriously and have lived a heroic life, you might ascend and become an angel sort of being. All right, the chthonic gods, the chthonic religion teaches that that's all nonsense. When you die, your soul dissolves. And recycling, reincarnation isn't real. It's recycling. You just dissolve into spirit energy. And like later you get jumbled back together and shoved into some other body. But it's not you. It's you mixed with hundreds of other people, weird, flat, things like that. And so what the chthonic gods teach is that you need to use necromantic magic to tie your soul to your body or to your tomb to await the time of the awakening, when the chthonic gods will come to earth and they will restore everyone to life. And so it's essentially the Zaharan religion, the chthonic religion, is essentially Christianity as Romans viewed it through secondhand gossip. So they're
That's
like,
awesome. That's
right, like they have these horrible catacombs, and they worship a god who dies, but like but then he's still alive, and they eat the flesh and blood of their god. Like, it's hot, So I was like, let me like lean into this and make like this hilarious evil religion. And so that's what the chthonic faith is. So essentially what you have is, because of that, in all the areas where the chthonic faith has existed, you have all these tombs and mausoleums and catacombs filled with undead that are all in torpor waiting for the awakening. And so you can just you accidentally stumble into a ruin and you're like, oh, I wonder who built this ruin. And then, you're like, oh yeah, clearly those guys did. This is very bad. So dialing back from the afterlife to the cosmogony itself, the premise is that there was an all-powerful, all-knowing being called the Cosmarch. And the Cosmarch created the cosmos by becoming the cosmos. And it's an open question as to why the Cosmarch did this. The lawful gods believe that the Cosmarch did this because, necessarily being all things, he included evil in himself. And so therefore, the Cosmarch instantiated himself into the universe and set aside processes by which good could defeat evil, and then he could essentially assemble into a harmony of virtuous beings again. That's the lawful belief. The chaotic belief is that because the Cosmarch was all things, he necessarily included weakness, and so the point of scattering himself and becoming the universe was to eliminate weakness. And so they have a Nietzschean morality, of power and survival of the fittest. And then finally, the neutral belief is that the reason the Cosmarch became the universe is that the one thing the Cosmarch couldn't experience was what it's like to not be the Cosmarch. And so he made himself everyone so he could experience what that's like. And so they tend to take like the evil god's gonna evil, lawful god's gonna lawful, So anyway, so those line up with the two afterlives of the Empyrean and the chthonic, because the chthonic think most people, are weak and their soul dissolves when they die, and only the strong have the willpower and the magical power to bind themselves to eternal life. And the and the Empyreans are like, if I do the right thing, then I'll be reborn and I'll be, so. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this is great. Cosmology is generally my big inspiration. One of two big inspirations. The other, which is segues great from talking about the gods and the afterlife, is the nature of magic. How common is magical power in the Auran Empire? Is there that kind of arcane divine split that you see in games like D&D, and is magic as such more mysterious or like a supernatural science?
Yeah. So we'll go back to the cosmogony. So we have the Cosmarch creates the universe and instantiates himself into it. So in the process of instantiating himself into the universe, he puts shards of himself into everything, both living creatures and unliving creatures. And those shards are called the Logos, which is inspired by Stoicism, which, basically believed that, the Logos inhabited all aspects of the cosmos. And they're what in living creatures, they're what creates a soul. Living creatures have a larger fragment of the Cosmarch in them, and they're configured such that they can be animated by it, and that's their soul. And then, so magic is essentially manipulating this divine essence of the Cosmarch, which is ubiquitous in the world. And there's two ways you can do it. You can do it via arcane or divine. The arcane method is you're tapping the ambient. You're using your personal power to tap the ambient power in the world around you. So the air, the earth, the stones, etc. So you get good, strong, powerful elemental spells, blasty spells. You can mess with the natural order, that kind of thing. Arcane magic. The divine magic is you use your personal power to reach out and contact a god who then sends you some of his divine power. And now this divine economy or magical economy is built into the whole game. So as a crusader or priestess or other cleric type character, you can go out and proselytize to acquire congregants. And then those congregants give you divine power that you can use to fuel magic research and cast spells with. And so the idea is that basically the gods give you an affiliate deal. If you get people to worship me, I'll direct 10% of what they would direct to me over to you for your purposes. And so the clerics are constantly proselytizing to bring people to their faith. The mages can tap into that same power, but they do it differently. So one, they can do it through blood sacrifice. You kill them and take their soul. You can kill a creature, and then when a creature dies and its soul leaves, a residue remains. And so you can take that residue and use it as a magic component. So troll heart or orc eyes or whatever. And that's the explanation for why those have magic power. Wizards can also set up dungeons. And in the dungeons, they can, to have monsters come in, and then they can either harvest the arcane power from the monsters by having them worship them as like a dungeon god, or they can just kill them and harvest them for monster parts, literally monster farming. So there's a Tower of Knowledge which studies magic. So it is definitely something that's studied. But there's something called esoteric magic, which is there's the laws of magic that everybody understands, and that you can build spells using these techniques, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's esoteric magic, which is essentially lost secrets that no one understands, no one can replicate. We don't know how the spell was invented, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that the esoteric magic allows the GM to put spells in the game that he doesn't necessarily want the players to be able to research, or magic items he doesn't want them to be able to replicate. You can be like, this is esoteric magic.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So there's something you said in there, actually. It kind of brings us to something we wanted to ask about, the topic of dungeons in general. Is that in a lot of D&D like games, a lot of times dungeons are these sort of wacky, very conceptually flimsy haunted houses. They're kind of a fun house, and they don't, to my mind, they don't really even make sense. It's like, who built this? Why was this here? How does this at all fit into the world?
How has it been left untouched for so long? So that now that it's a regional threat,
and the traps are still armed, and
there's
all of these kinds of issues. And I've read the Sinister Stone of Sakura module, which was excellent. And those questions are answered in that module, which is wonderful. But the idea that the wizards, when you kind of get to this level of where you're constructing this dungeon, how does that fit in with like the local kingdom? If some wizard is like creating this horrible labyrinth full of monsters, is this something that would like the government sanction this? Or
it's such a fun question. So the way it works in the Auran Empire setting is that the wizards who want to go do that are your sort of introvert INTJ wizards who go off into the wilderness to do
the master race, if you will.
Yes. Speaking the extrovert wizards who enjoy getting to go to the gladiatorial games and enjoy the orgies and those sort of things. So they stay in town, and they basically are kept on the payroll. And so they get government grants and sponsorship monies, and they do spellcasting services, and they use that to then purchase the monster parts they needed on a market from treasure hunters and things like that. So there's an economy there. And everybody always says, if mages were real, they would rule the world. And in ACKS and Auran Empire, high level characters rule the world. So personal power does translate to political power, but it isn't per se mages rule the world. And the reason for that was I did this study of the Soviet Union. And because everyone was like, why didn't the KGB just run the country? And it was because the KGB was actively kept in check by the military, which had its own pseudo KGB like powers, and the government, the Kremlin, would constantly use the two against each other. And so in the Auran Empire setting, essentially the divine casters, who are the Temple of the Winged Sun, the Temple of the Blade and Veil, Sisters of the Hearthfire, are the check and balance to the Tower of Knowledge of the Wizards. The Tower of Knowledge of the Wizards can't get too far out of hand without running into problems with the god, etc. So, so that's how I keep that. In terms of dungeons, I make a huge effort to achieve verisimilitude and consistency with the world. So my most famous dungeon is called Secrets of the Nether City, and it is about an enormous, truly enormous catacomb that is hidden beneath a layer of volcanic dust beneath the sewer system of a major Auran city. And I came upon this question of, if this ancient city has been there for so long, why hasn't anyone found it? And so what I decided is that the entrance to it is at the bottom of a cesspool. And so to get to the dungeon, you have to literally wade through shit, swim under the shit, get in. And then when you get there, you go down the steps and it's just horrible sewage everywhere with slimes and molds and bugs. And it was actually too effective, because there's a recurring problem in the ACKS community of GMs buy that module and then the adventurers are like, either never go into the cesspool, because who would go to a cesspool, or they do go in and then they go down there like, this sucks, I'm not fighting swarms and bugs, and they leave. And so this massive underground tomb complex remains unexplored. And I'm like, okay, honestly, that's verisimilitude. If it was really going to be unexplored for that long, a lot of adventuring parties wouldn't find it, and they don't. So I can say, I'm not sure if it's a triumph or a tragedy for my module. I vacillate.
I think that's absolutely a triumph. And like,
right.
And so two things, and then I'll turn it over to you, Nick. But the so with the again, with the wizards creating these things, like you said, that you'll have people that are like within the cities, and they're building these sorts of things. Is this something that would be used like by the military, like creating some sort of like giant menagerie of monsters to like put field into battle? You know, the wizard is attracting the monsters, and he's conducting his magical research, but would the military be interested in harnessing this power?
Clear power?
So the answer is yes, but not anymore. The setting begins in the aftermath of an apocalypse called the Day Without Night. No one really remembers what happened, but the elves were the first civilization to rebuild. And the elves end up going to war with the dwarves. And so to persecute their war with the dwarves, they start using lizard man mercenaries and monsters and dragon turtles and things like that. And they end up getting overthrown and defeated by their own monstrous armies. And so then the lizard men take over. And but the lizard men don't really want to spend a lot of time dealing with rules and governments. So they appoint like a human slave caste, which is their equivalent of monsters, obviously, to them. And of course, then the human slave caste, the Zaharans, throw down the lizard men. And then the Zaharans then take power, and they create their own monstrous slave race, which is the Beastmen. They create the orcs and the goblins and everything as warriors, and they create wyverns and all these other monsters in these breeding programs that they use for war. And then finally, they get defeated by the Empyreans, who create the Auran Empire. And they're like, look, every single prior empire has been destroyed by its slave army of monsters. We are not going to have a slave army of monsters. We're going to have citizen soldiers. So you could, but
there's dangers associated with it.
Right.
But I suppose there's dangers associated with creating the dungeon in the first place, even if you're strictly doing this for magical research.
Because you don't control what shows up. It's random. Yeah. And so what happens is there's a wandering encounter table that's based on, so terrain is divided into civilized, borderlands, outland, and unsettled. And based on where you're situated, and then the types like mountain versus swamp, you have a different number of creatures will come there, different types of creatures, different rarities of creatures, but you don't functionally control it. So you could attract, a nice mid-level dragon with a good little horde, but you could accidentally attract an ancient dragon who's more powerful than you, and he's like, thanks for the dungeon. So
yeah,
right, free house.
Yeah, thanks.
Free real estate.
Yeah, free real estate. Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is, in one of the Kickstarter updates, when you gave the contents of the Judge's Journal, which I'm very much looking forward to reading, in the dungeon construction rules, it's like, map it out, make your wandering encounter tables, populate it with treasure. It goes all down all these steps. And the last one, it says review for verisimilitude.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, finally someone.
Yeah.
It's like, we've been sitting here like, anyone say something about this.
Yes. Yeah. So like if you looking at my dungeon, so the Sinister Stone of Sakkara, it's it was an evil temple. The gods bury it in a dome of rock. It stayed sealed until an earthquake broke it open, and so then the evil artifact from within was able to reach out. So that's why it's only recently been discovered. With the Secrets of the Nether City, so it's a city of people that used to worship the chthonic gods, so they built huge catacombs underneath their city, the way like medieval French did. But then that city was destroyed in a volcanic eruption, and then a new city was built on top of it, and they unwittingly built their sewers connecting into the city they didn't know about, which is why the cesspool connects into that. So there's lots of verisimilitude. When you go down there, you're not like hanging out with tribes of orcs with no apparent source of food.
Right. How
like
they get there.
It's undead, it's slimes, it's bugs. And and I actually traced the sewage flow all the way through. And so, the different monsters all feed on the sewage, and then there's the creatures that then feed on the monsters that feed on the sewage. So there's like an ecosystem. And we have another one called Sepulchre of the Sorceress Queen, which is a Zaharan temple tomb to a powerful sorceress queen, with undead that are in torpor awaiting the awakening, in a very hard to find tomb. We have ruined city of Sifendir, is an elven city that was captured in war by a dragon, and the dragon has ruled it ever since. And everyone's been kind of terrified to go there, but now the rumor is the dragon is getting really old and maybe close to death. So maybe you want to check it out. So I try and make sure all the adventures have a lot of verisimilitude, because I get super annoyed at just random fun houses.
It drives me insane.
I just
takes me out immediately.
Immediately.
Our kind of core thing is we're very much into having an immersive experience and role playing the character as if they were like real within the world.
Right.
And when you show up and it's like a house of mirrors, or there's a swinging saw blade, and it drives me crazy.
Right.
Now those can be okay if they're one-offs that have been carefully explained as to why they exist in the world, right? Like you can have one funhouse dungeon which was created by a mad wizard who just wanted to torment adventurers. You can do that. You can have one of those, but like not every dungeon can be that. So.
Right.
And the other thing, interrupt me if I feel like I've asked a bunch of questions.
It's all right.
No,
that's what we're here for.
Yeah, the thing that I really enjoyed about Sinister Stone as well was that all of the denizens of the dungeon are there for a reason, and they have motivations. They're not all necessarily on the same team, without giving too much away about the actual module itself. But this was something I was thinking about recently with relation to dungeons. Is a lot of times these things are so big that you can't possibly loot them in one go.
Right.
Like you have to do these multiple delves. And which is standard from what I understand for a larger dungeon.
Yeah.
But thinking of the dungeon as like a living place and a reactive place, like when you're running a game, if they break down the doors, they kill a bunch of monsters and steal their stuff and leave, do the rest of the monsters come after them or retaliate maybe against the city? Because I've kind of been thinking about these things almost in terms of like enemy strongholds. And like if someone broke into my house and stole a bunch of stuff, I'm not just going to wait for them to come back and do it in 3 days.
And if there's enough of them, are they the ones, drawing first blood against the town or the kingdom or what have you?
Right. So I do a lot of that in my game. So either myself role playing as the enemy, or sometimes
Mm-hmm.
asking a friend who's tactically minded, explain the situation. What would you do in this circumstance? I'll give you some recent examples from actual play. So in the second edition playtest I did with a group called the Blades of Fate, they heard that there was a mountain called the Dragon's Tor that was populated with a tribe of beastmen, and there was, a warrant to kill the beastmen. And they heard rumors that a dragon lived in Dragon's Tor, but they dismissed them. And so they went on this raid against Dragon's Tor and killed a bunch of beastmen. And so then the next night, the dragon emerged from Dragon's Tor and burned down part of the city, and then sent an emissary saying, hand over the adventurers to me, or I'll burn down the rest of the city.
I'll burn down the rest, yeah.
And they were like, oh, okay, I guess that's why it's called Dragon's Tor. So that was one example. Another one was in the Sinister Stone of Saqqara. It took the group a really long time to clean it, and there's to cleanse the dungeon, and there's a kind of a clock that's ticking as the stone gets more and more powerful. Yeah. And so as they started to come back, the dungeon was literally mutating in its shape as the red bubbling fluid and stuff that's on the bottom level was beginning to bubble up to the surface. And so like they go into an area they've already been before, and now it looks like they're inside an intestine or something. Yeah. And they were pretty freaked out about that. And that really made them expedite like dealing with the dungeon. Right. So there's that. And then I have had monsters pursue players to the point where many of them have invested in passing without trace spells and proficiencies to like avoid leaving tracks. And I always will have like, if you come and knock the door down and don't show up for a month, they'll have put some sort of crude new door up, right? Like, just because they're evil doesn't mean that they want to have, roaches and cold weather come in. They want to
right.
Or humans, for that matter.
More importantly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm just imagining like even if you had like mercenaries with you and set up a camp, and we're just gonna treating it like the movie The Mummy, where you have these large archaeological expeditions essentially of crooks going in, multiple parties going in to raid this place. If it's full of beholders and orcs and all sorts of stuff, it's like they're gonna swarm you.
Yeah, certainly any sapient or supernaturally intelligent denizens. Yeah, it's like, what do you do if a bunch of bandits camp outside the village? You don't just go about your business,
right? Right.
Like that'll be fine.
Right. Yeah, and my groups typically have to take precautions, right? Like they'll set up a base camp several miles away from the dungeon, in a safe and secluded location, and then they'll approach, and then they try and cover their tracks on the way out and things like that. Yeah. So, which I think, always needs to be balanced. Like you don't want to go out of your way to be so punitive about going on an adventure that they're like, well, fuck it.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. But I think if you don't do it at all, then it really robs the game of some verisimilitude, because the enemy become cardboard cutouts or, spawned MMO monsters.
That's the other thing, is that I think a lot of people misunderstand about like wanting a strong sense of verisimilitude, is that it actually makes the game better, because the game tends to have higher stakes. If you're invested in your character and treating them like a real thing, you tend to become a little more protective of them.
Yes.
And if you lack that, and it is a very, very much just a funhouse thing, then
why would I care?
Why would I care? Yeah. Why would I?
Everything is arbitrary.
I don't. Yeah. That to me is it's an unappealing play style.
Yeah, 100%.
It's kind of like there are some video games where there's no cumulative campaign effort, right? Like you do the battle, you play it, you have fun, like, hey, good game, whatever, right? And then you have others, which is like XCOM, say, where you have this massive strategic overlay, and then that tactical battle really matters to you, right? Those are characters that you need. And so ACKS is designed to be like XCOM, where you've got this strategic top tier element that you tap into, so that everything that's beneath it matters. And I think, verisimilitude, simulationism, all of that is integrated together. It's not antithetical to the gameplay. It is the gameplay.
Yes.
Yeah.
100% agree.
So
go ahead.
I want to, we're talking about a lot of the specifics of the dungeoning aspect that, the most most players are going to experience the most of, right? It's the adventurer stage.
Mhm.
But taking it back to the metaphysical aspect we sort of touched on with the cosmology, it sounds like dungeons as such in the game, they're conceptualized as a number of different things, from a monster den to an enemy village to a source of true supernatural evil. And I think that itself is realistic to have, multiple different rules and illustrations of what these places are. But for, let's say, a magician making, crafting, creating these dungeons and bringing supernatural monsters and unspeakable creatures or just wildlife to these places, are there rules in ACKS that threaten not only like the magician himself, whether it's a player character or an NPC, but even adventurer level player characters going into these sites of, it seems to me, is supernatural evil one way or another, even if it's just a tribe of goblins. Metaphysically, you're bringing together concentrations of life, which is like inimical to humanity and order.
So ACKS has a concept of what are called sinkholes of evil and pinnacles of good. Sinkholes of evil are created by chaotic places of worship and places of death. And I give like the percentage chance of a graveyard turning into a sinkhole of evil every year based on the number of dead per square foot.
Nice.
Because I'm like that. And likewise, the size and value of the altar in the chaotic church will determine how much the sinkhole of evil. And they come in different tiers. So you've got like, a shadowed sinkhole of evil, a lighted sinkhole of evil, and then a forsaken sinkhole of evil. And they have different effects, like turning becomes harder. Monsters monsters that die can spawn as undead and things like that. It can attract creatures from other planes to enter the space. And there's similar place of power for good and for all the various elements as well. And then in the Heroic Fantasy Handbook, we have some rules for corruption from dealing with certain types of magic. And so in that supplement, not in the core ACKS, but in that supplement, exposure to that magic can also give you corruption over time. That kind of like dwelling in a sinkhole of evil turns you into kind of a monstrous being. So the Heroic Handbook is essentially a bunch of options for people that want to add different literary flavors to the game.
And is that all going to be like collated into ACKS II?
Not everything from the Heroic Fantasy Handbook is collated. Some of it is, but the books were already so big. I just had to make some tough decisions about what to put in and what not. So
cool.
So it sounds like we lost your mic for a minute in the stream, is what the comments said. But now it's echoing. So I am going to just have us do one little boomer moment technical. I'd like you to just talk for a second, maybe ask your next question. We'll see if the stream can let us
chat,
know.
let us know if you can hear me.
If the echo is gone.
Yeah.
Or if his audio is gone.
Right. So we touched on briefly, and I think we'll dive more into it in a moment, the economic aspect of the game. The attention paid to making gold for experience makes sense, but this is all describing how humanity operates in the Auran Empire or any other setting. Do the dungeon environments operate from a mechanical standpoint, like from a GM trying to create this opposing force? Did they operate on the same like gold rules, the economic mechanics that are there for the GM to make a town, a kingdom, a duchy?
Yeah, so the answer is they can if you want them to. I provide the rules for setting up like Beastman clan holds and how many tribal warriors a Beastman chief could assemble, and how much what do the Beastman non-combatants produce from their slash and burn agriculture and crude farming and things like that. So all of that is available to you. So if and in Axioms, not in the core rules, but in our Axioms Ezine, I've also published rules for playing monsters as playable characters. So you could be an orc warrior and level up an orc and things like that.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah. And then the monsters manual also has rules for playing monsters, both being transformed into a monster like a lycanthrope or just leveling up as a monster and what that's like and getting proficiencies and things like that. So for the most part, most of the time when I run, I don't heavily simulate the economy of, the orc tribes or whatnot. But I do so for the big bads. So like, the evil sorcerer king that's building his army in the waste, I build out the army. And I build out his supply lines and how much money he has. And so when, he comes to attack and like he takes 20% casualties, that matters, right? You did 20% casualty. He can't necessarily replace that.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So on that note, I think one of the big kind of issues that I've seen in old school games that I didn't particularly care for, but that I understood the incentive structure of the game, and this is something that is absolutely at the core of ACKS, is the experience system. And a lot of old school games ran on partial monster experience from combat, but mostly from treasure and magical items that are recovered from the dungeon. And this kind of loops and incentivizes the players to go out and explore, to get more loot so they can level up, so that they can go deeper into the dungeon to get more loot and level up. And there's kind of they accounted for when players get to high level, they're complete badasses. They're really extremely powerful. And so there's this element where they can create domains and then become these kind of you almost retire the player, or retire the player, retire the character, make new characters. And this person may have like if they're a fighter, they may have like a stronghold, a castle, and you've taken that, but you've actually, I think, solved a massive problem, which is over the course of this leveling, there is this giant genre switch in the game.
Yes.
A first level fighter versus a 10th level fighter is so massively different in how that plays and how that plays into thinking of this as like a real person.
And by level 20, you're not even human.
Yeah.
anymore.
I mean, we were just talking about, look at like Aragorn. Was he like level 6 or something?
Right. Whatever level he from day one to the last page of, Return of the King, he's not getting these crazy supernatural powers. He's just a guy,
Right.
Yeah. So it's so the interesting thing, the thing that has interested me most about ACKS has been this experience system that you have of using gold for XP essentially, but having that almost have like a ratchet on the amount of resources you need to then level up. And so this encourages you to do other things than simply always going into the dungeon. So could you walk us through a little bit of what is the core of the experience system, and how does the game incentivize the players to move from being an adventurer to being a conqueror and then to being a king?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So let's start by talking about how would an NPC level up, because a ton of work has been put into explaining how the NPCs got to where they are. And so the easiest way to imagine the old Roman cursus honorium, where you move through various offices, right? Or you could imagine you're a young scion and you're getting promoted from, baron to count, etc. Okay. So you start off in your junior office. You're a first level guy. You're 22 years old. Your dad has just given you the gig, and you're getting 200 gold pieces a month in income from the estate that you're managing. And at that point, you have what's called a GP threshold. At first level, it's I think 25 gold pieces, and so each month you get your income of 200. You subtract your GP threshold of 25. You make 175 experience points. About a year later, you've made it to second level. Well, now you're second level. Now your GP threshold doubles to 50. So now you're getting 150 XP per month instead of 175. When you make it to third level, your GP threshold is 100. By the time you make it to fourth level, you're not advancing anymore. And you're like, oh, and if you never get another realm, if you never expand your holdings, if your father doesn't die, you just are stuck at fourth level. And the same thing is true of getting experience points from proselytization and congregants, from getting experience points from magic research, from mercantile venture. There's this ratchet effect. And so the typical person of high level who's an NPC is quite old. Like, all other things being equal, the 14th level cleric is probably about 70 years old, because that's how long it takes to get to 14th level as an NPC. All of the military rulers of 9th level and above are all middle-aged guys that have taken stat penalties because they're no longer at the prime of their fighting prowess. And a lot of them don't have great stats in the first place because they didn't go through the funnel of adventuring, right? They just kind of inherited a domain, and their great-grandfather was a badass, but they're just dudes. So then you introduce the players into the mix, and the players are going out and they're adventuring and they're bringing in tons of treasure and they're leveling up much faster, right? And so a player might be 4th level, and still only 21 years old, and all of a sudden he's kind of on par with that local lord who's been ruling that domain for years and years and years. But actually, he's even more powerful because he's younger. He doesn't have stat penalties and debuffs from age. He's got magic items. And as you level up higher and higher as an adventurer, that relative edge against the non-adventuring NPCs grows. And so that's what makes it possible for, at 9th level, for you to say, I'm going to take over, is because at 9th level, you are more badass than the rulers of 9th level.
Yeah.
And so Conan can go strangle the king on the throne and take power kind of vibe. So that's the general framework. But it's generally an XP for gold system. You get a small amount of XP for killing monsters. And then any XP you get that's not from treasure and monsters has this GP threshold, which constantly means that you need to be expanding your holdings, expanding your merchant empire, expanding your magic research laboratory or whatever if you want to keep leveling up. Otherwise, you stall out. And so that creates this really great pyramid structure in the game. That shows up in all the demographic tables and everything. So, like, for instance, there's actually only one 14th level mage in the whole world. There's only one 14th level cleric in the whole world. There's two 13th level. And, like, you go down to, like, 9th level, and there's still a small enough number that they probably all know each other, right? It's like 200 guys. It's Dunbar number. Whereas, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of first level characters. In terms of the scaling issue you mentioned, the goal is that at 1st level, the combat feels like you're a Roman legionary in an actual historical battle. And at 14th level, you feel like you're Achilles in book 30 when you're just on your chariot massacring every person in front of you. So that's kind of that's kind of the goal. But you never like, fighters never suddenly get the power to fly or like hurl their swords and discharge lightning bolts or stuff like that. And it's always kept to a more grounded, I wouldn't say historical, but more like less gonzo, less superheroes power level.
Right. Yeah, it's in the name, right? Adventure, Conquer a King. For me, it was one of the most immediately attractive thing. It's like, we've been talking about these multiple genres existing in the same D&D dynamic for a while, and to have a game that recognizes that explicitly in the name is a breath of fresh air. We keep coming back to different mechanics and different thought processes that you put into making the world consistent. Simulationist, right? You're trying to simulate a real world that maintains and reinforces its own verisimilitude. But I know you've also talked about ways in which not only the characters mechanically have avenues to be consistent beings in a world, but for the player incentives and for the character incentives to be in communion. So could you talk a little bit about some ways that you've gone to, what would you say, diminish that kind of disconnect, and maybe what other what problems were you seeing with, like, a disconnect between player and character incentives in other games?
Yeah, so I would say if there's one key insight I've had as a designer that I think has improved my design skills, it's the concept that players respond to incentives, and the XP system is the key incentive that they respond to. And so whatever it is that you want them to be doing in the game, needs to be an avenue for them to get XP or to get better at otherwise getting XP. A lot of games and a lot of game masters view the experience point system as something that's tacked on to the game. So you hear a lot of people in the 5th edition community say, oh, I don't even use experience points. I just level the party up when it's dramatically appropriate. Okay,
Yeah.
let's stop right there. What does that mean? Who's deciding? Well, the GM is deciding what's dramatically appropriate. Okay, so that means if I want to level up my character, then I have to figure out what the GM thinks is dramatic and do that.
Yes.
So now my goal in this game is not to be a character in the world. It's not to do what my character would do. It's to figure out the story arc that the GM thinks would be cool for me to level up. Right. Or you have another example where, games like Star Wars and things would give character points at the end of each session. And the number of character points you get was partly based on your character's behavior, but also based on the GM's assessment of your role play. Okay. Well, if it's based on the GM's assessment of the role play, then that means my target is just to role play with that GM and to get that spotlight on me as much as possible so I can have those character points come to me. And if Bob is role playing, well, I better make an even louder, funny accent because I need those XP, not Bob. Right. And so these systems, they're poorly thought out and they create bad gameplay outcomes. This is why you get players sitting around saying, what does the GM want us to do? Right? It's because they've been trained to think that way because they're responding to the incentives of broken systems being put in front of them. So in ACKS, everything that I want you to do as a designer in order to progress from adventure to conquer to king, you get rewarded for. You killed monsters? Great. You brought treasure back to civilization? Great. But even more broadly, let's say one of your party members died heroically, saving everyone. Okay, well, the game actually says if you give them a heroic funeral, the amount of GP you spend on their funeral service and tomb, he can apply to his next character, right? So now you actually have an incentive for someone to be heroic. So let's imagine the two of you are in the dungeon and if you both try and flee, you'll both be cut down. So you turn and you say, I'll cover the escape, but honor me. Right. And so then your friend flees, you die. And then when the friend gets back to town, he spends the money you guys escaped with. He spends half of it on the funeral service for you. And now your new character can enter at higher XP. Right. So the game, even to things like that, the game incentivizes the pro-social activities that you want the group to be doing.
Yeah.
And the reason I put that rule in is because I had this realization that the average player probably fears the death of his character more than the character fears the death of the character, right? Like if you're a Viking hero who thinks you're going to go to Valhalla when you die, you're like, ah, or a crusader who thinks death takes you to heaven. But the players be like, well, I don't want to have to re-roll Athelstan. He's 11th level.
Yeah.
Right. So we gotta have ways to incentivize them to act heroically. So players respond to incentives. I was a lawyer by training, and I took a lot of courses on something called law and economics. The premise of which is that economic activity is caused by the legal system. So what economic activity occurs is caused by the legal system, and every legal rule, law, statute can be understood as what economic behavior does it incentivize. And so I sort of took that and brought that into my game design.
Yeah, it's like an invisible set of constraints. People don't know it's there. They don't think about it, but it guides their behavior in ways they don't understand.
Yes.
Which is, from my perspective, it's the hands-off approach in the market is generally the best. But the incentives are, you're absolutely right. The incentives of the laws, and in this case in the game, the rules, absolutely do shape the behavior and the course of the game. And so this is the inclusion of economics as well into ACKS is something I think you've said you were actually kind of surprised at how much people were interested in it, and
I was,
really took to it. That's something that I have an obsession with economics, and it's something. It is always a sticking point in games, movies, TV, where there's just something that is so unbelievable to me, because and economics is a little counterintuitive. At least some of the conclusions to it, but it's so frustrating when it's not even addressed. And so the systems that you've included for economic activity, and even extending that to you can gain experience through mercantile adventures, is something I really, really appreciate. I got a months ago when I was talking about XP for gold on Twitter, I made the point, like, why would you go into the dungeon if you could be a capitalist? You know, you could make, could make so much more money and more XP. And people were like, you don't get it. It's because it's gold taken from the dungeon and from adventuring. And I was like, but this doesn't make any sense. And I've tried to play in previous games. This wasn't like, I wasn't trying to be just a jerk on Twitter. I really do mean it, because it's like I played characters that have done this, and I mean, I have a video on this channel. It's like 9 years old, talking about this capitalist that I was playing in a settlement building game. The campaign was basically like, there is this new town. It's almost kind of like a Deadwood style thing. And the premise is, you guys make of it what you want. This could turn into an empire. It could be, it could completely wash away. And it was awesome. And I loved the idea of playing a character like that. And so seeing this actually included in the game is just really, really fascinating to me, and much appreciated that it's in there. But aside from just the explicit, you can make money off of arbitrage trading or anything like that, how does the economic system of the game actually affect the gameplay? And can you give us kind of an overview of how this might work in terms of the higher tiers of play? If you are running a kingdom, how does this affect you managing your domain, keeping your people from revolting and overthrowing you after you've overthrown someone? And how does this affect raising armies and waging war and sieges and all of this?
Yep. So at the low levels of play, the first thing you're going to encounter in terms of the economics is what's called the market availability table. And so essentially I built an entire circular flow of the entire economy to calculate its GDP. And then from that, I was able to work out, the amounts of goods and services that are created on a per capita basis. And then from that, you can then say, okay, well, this is how many goods and services are created at this town. And then if you say, well, this is the complete list of all goods and services available, now we have an estimate of how many swords are available in the town, et cetera. And so, and that arose because when I first started running fantasy games again, my players would do things like go into a small hamlet and be like, oh, I want to buy 20 suits of plate armor. And you're like, I mean, it says plate armor is available for 60 GP. Is that really available? So now it's like, no, okay, there's no plate armor available here. This is a class 6 village. It's tiny. But, if you go to a class 1 town like the capital of Aura, then, you can buy a ton of plate armor. So that's the first thing most people interact with. The second thing they interact with in the economy, particularly if you have someone playing the venturer class, which is that sort of merchant capitalist class, someone playing a venturer, is that you can actually borrow money in ACKS. And why would you borrow money? Well, as it turns out, just like there's a limit to how much you can buy, there's also a limit to how much you can sell. Just because you have a rare totem from Zahar worth 20,000 gold pieces doesn't necessarily mean that a buyer immediately shows up for your rare totem of 20,000 gold pieces. But if you really want 20,000 gold pieces, what you can do is you take it to the Merchants Guild, you have it appraised, they take it as collateral, and they loan you the money. And then you pay a very, very high interest rate. It's about 33% a year in ACKS, which is actually a historically accurate number. But for players, that's really valuable. So like my current game group, they have a ton of their treasure is just sitting in vaults at the Merchants Guild, and they've borrowed against it in order to fund their expeditions. So then they actually have to pay that back. So that gets interesting. At the higher levels, and I should mention, that's optional. You don't have to do that, right? You could just, put it on the market, wait to sell it, keep on going. But it's there if you want it. At the higher levels, what happens is when you get your domain, you get the ability to control how much you charge taxes from your peasants, how much you spend on the garrison to defend your peasants, and then like how much you invest in upkeep on your stronghold, how much you spend on feasts to make everybody happy, et cetera. And all of these have implications. If you don't spend enough on garrison, It can result in problems when monsters or enemies attack your domain and the peasants aren't defended. If you overtax them, it can reduce their morale. If you can spend tons of money on, feasts and things to raise their morale. But remember that your experience points comes from your domain income. So if you're reducing your income to make the peasants happier, you're leveling up slower. And so the incentive is to be as much of a tyrant as you possibly can be and oppress the peasants as much as possible without getting them to revolt.
Right.
And then based on that, based on the number of families you have in your domain, based on how much income you have, now you know how many troops you can afford to hire and how many troops you can afford to field into the dungeon. And then that becomes another major economic aspect of the game, which is fielding troops, hiring troops, raising troops. And then after that, it can get even more esoteric, like thieves can set up criminal guilds and spy networks and things. And so they can do, like, let's say you're the merchant and you've got a merchant caravan coming in of rare spices, but this particular market has a 20% duty on spices. So then, but your friend is a thief who's 11th level and he's got a criminal guild in this city. So he has his ruffians do hijinks to smuggle your spice in. So then you can sell it without the 20%. Right. And all of that is supported by the game. You can, it's all right there if you want it. If you don't care, if you're like, I just want to kill dragons, bro, you can just kill dragons.
Right.
It's open. It's agentic. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that for me, a lot of the aspects which are brought into the gameplay loop in either Conquer or especially King mode, Matt, to your point, your capitalist character. I want to run a business. I want to manipulate the black market, the criminal underworld of this city. That's really, really interesting. That's not part of like the the hero's journey,
right? Yeah.
Story arc that I think it would be fair to say Adventure of Conquer King is
written by Ayn Rand. No.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Is there support and advice rules for coming in at a higher level, not necessarily for the character power, but to maintain the genre? Okay, I want to play that capitalist game, or we're all members of the 5 families in the capital, and that's what we're going to sort of focus on.
Absolutely.
But we want to maintain the genre, so we're gonna we want to maintain all the support structure that the game you've put a lot of effort into keeping it consistent and load bearing. So is there advice rules for that?
There is. There's a whole section in the Judge's Journal called Advanced Characters. And what you do is you pick what tier that you want the characters to begin play at. And based on that tier, they get a flat amount of experience points and a certain amount of gold and a certain number of rolls on magic item tables. And then you can then spend your gold that you have on, equipment, obviously, but on retainers, strongholds, fortresses, ships, urban investment, mercantile investments, etc. And at the very highest levels, like the amount of gold you get is very, very large, but then your expenses are going to be very large as well. Like, you're like, yeah, I spent a million gold pieces so I could have an amazing class 1 city under my rule. Okay, well, you can do that, and so those are fully fleshed out. And there's basically two ways presented to play it. One is just start at a higher level and have fun. And then the other is make a character at every tier and kind of run your campaign across all 3 tiers simultaneously. So you've got, okay, you guys, we have this at the top, we're all playing master thieves of the 5 families. And then also we're all going to roll up adventurers who are, the ruffians that work for them.
It's like a troop style play type thing.
Yeah. So it explains how to do that as well. It doesn't go into a huge amount of detail, but it's there if you want it.
Yeah. That actually really cool. That really interests me because I've been interested in troop style play. I know different games do it, like Ars Magica, and I know that a lot of older groups did that more frequently. I would say it's the Star Trek game by Modiphius does that, I think, quite well. But never put it through its paces or tried. This This seems like
that sounds awesome.
really cool.
I ran a really fun troop game using the Mechton rules by R. Talsorian. And the way we did it is that each person had 2 characters, and one was base personnel and the other was a mecha pilot. And then one of your characters was an experienced veteran that started with a bunch of skill points, and then one of your characters was a newbie. And so you had to pick. And so you could either be the guy who was the highest ranking base personnel, so the squadron commander back at the base was the lowest ranking pilot on the tactical missions. The highest ranking pilot on the tactical missions was the lowest ranking member of the base personnel. And so each session would begin on base with making decisions, because it was sandbox, making decisions about what missions to do and things. So then the guy who was in charge of the base was making some strategic calls, and then they'd go out on the missions, and then the guy who was the tactical commander was then in control, and the other guy was relegated to being the newbie. And it played really well. So if I ever do a mecha game, I'm going to steal that approach. I really liked it.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think you could probably do something similar with ACKS, where like you could divide the experience points between 2 characters, and so you could have two guys at this level, or one guy at this level and one guy at this other, or something like that. Could be really fun.
Nice.
See here, Crafty Matt said, Black Lodge Games Modiphius's Dune game is built entirely on troop play. The only main character is the house.
It's funny. I bought the Dune game and I haven't even opened it. I had it sitting on my bookcase.
Your bookcase that is totally well constructed, and we did not put the IKEA thing together
improperly.
Yeah,
because I didn't have anybody around that was going to play it. I was excited, and then I immediately lost all interest because I realized I have no one around me, or I didn't at the time play it. Yeah, right.
But so there's a lot of really interesting things about this progression through Adventure to Conquer to King, and I went and I read the Domains at War campaigns, a large portion of that rule set, and it was really cool. And to my knowledge, this is the rule set that is being included in the books that are coming with the Kickstarter, correct?
Yeah, a slightly improved version of that, yes.
And there is then the hyper-detailed, literal tabletop war game component of this, which is Domains at War Battles.
Correct.
Which, if you want to break out the minis and fight it out that way, is great. But I loved that you included a way for the characters to actually make a difference on the battlefield. And it's not simply just zooming in on part of the action, but it's all being handled by the abstract rules.
Right.
It really is like you can press your luck in a way. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about that.
Sure. Okay. So imagine there's no heroes involved, right? Then the way the battles get resolved is each of the units that participating has a battle rating, and you roll a number of attack throws equal to the battle rating of the army, inflict a certain number of casualties on the other guy. He does the other same thing, and slowly there's attrition. Maybe you move some guys up from the reserve. Okay, so that's how it works. So, but what that means is that each point of battle rating represents a certain number of troops in the world, right? So like 120 orc heavy infantry is a battle rating of 1, let's say, right? Or 30 goblin wolf riders is a battle rating of 4, or whatever. Okay. So what happens is when you have heroes present, the heroes can engage in what are called heroic forays. And they choose how many points of battle rating they want to confront in their foray, which represents how much risk they're taking on the battlefield. And they could bid, a half a battle rating. They could bid all the way up to 5 if they're feeling kind of suicidal, And so then the judge then looks at the troops that he's got in the enemy army, and then he picks an appropriate amount of battle rating of those troops, and then you fight that battle out using the tactical normal role-playing game rules. So like, for instance, let's say, the party of adventurers is like, we bid for 4 battle rating. You're like, all right, well, you're up against 30 goblin wolf riders, and then there's tables that indicate what range it starts, and then there's a vagaries table to determine the battlefield conditions under which the heroic foray occurs. So it could be that like while it's happening, everyone is being hit by rains of arrows that are coming in. And so like each round there's a random chance of an arrow hitting somebody. Or it could be that there's mounds of dead bodies that provide cover if you want to like hide behind the bodies or whatever, right? And there's a vagaries table for that. And then after you resolve the heroic foray, let's say you wipe out the wolves, the wolf riders, you just remove that unit from the battlefield. And so then the next time you do a battle turn, now I have 4 battle rating points less on my side. And so by taking risks, the the players can actually influence the outcome of the battle. And so a lot of times what happens is that the games will just say, well, the judge should just decide who wins, and your job is just to create a few fun set pieces for the players to do, and if they win them, then everybody wins, and if they lose them, then they lose the battle. But that's not the approach we take, because it's entirely possible you could win every heroic foray but still lose the battle because you're just that outnumbered, and now your troops in recoil. It's also possible you could be badly outnumbered and probably should lose the battle, but you do some amazing things.
Still turn the tide.
Forays and you turn the tide. And so it lets us have mass combat, huge armies, while at the same time still letting the heroes do heroic things and zoom in on them in an interlocked way. And this is my criticism and complaint against most of my competitors, which is that there are a lot of other games out there that will offer you some mechanics to do something up here, and it's just kind of like this floating game system, like, here's our abstract battle system, but it has no correlation to the underlying 1-to-1 scale game, and there's no way to integrate the two. Whereas our mechanics are all integrated.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's really impressive, because this whole thing of having these 3 phases and the joke of ACKS has a rule for that. It's not a joke.
Right.
Everything is really, really tightly integrated and very, very well thought out to provide this kind of larger than life experience, and in a way that doesn't have any similarity to perhaps like the modern 5th edition style of game, or even previous editions where you're playing these kind of like superheroes almost with a bunch of like powers, but you're dressed in like Renaissance fair costumes. It's like there's so much more to the feel of this kind of like coherent world that is very deeply attractive to me about this game. And on that note, I was kind of wondering if you were to pitch this to like put yourself in the shoes of a 5th edition game master who's a little tired of running 5th edition,
right?
And your players they're satisfied and happy with 5th edition, but you want to try and bring ACKS to the table. How are you going to approach your players to try it? How would you sell this to them?
Oh yeah. So, I've been in that situation. Like when I first started ACKS, I had to persuade my 3.5 edition players to give it a try. And I've definitely had to persuade lots of others. So what I typically do is actually not much different than what you said, is I say, look, the games that you've been playing are great games, but they are functionally Marvel movies in fantasy costumes.
Yeah.
Right? Your wizard has much more in common with Doctor Strange than he does with Merlin, and your fighter has a lot more in common with Wolverine and Captain America than he does with Tony. What we're going to play is going to be a lot more similar to Game of Thrones. Right? So you can be a great and powerful warrior, but you're also at risk of death. You can be a mysterious sorcerer, but you're not Doctor Strange. And there's going to be mass battles, and there's going to be armies, and there's going to be strongholds, and millions of gold pieces at stake in the struggle. And usually they're like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Let's give it a try. And then typically one of two things happens. Either session one, they play it like they're superheroes and everyone gets massacred, and then they're like, okay, that didn't go well. Or they read the rules a little bit, and then they approach it very cautiously but intelligently. And but even the ones that get massacred usually have a good time and come back for a second session. I've only had a few people who've tried ACKS who've really said this is not for me. And one of them was a female gamer who just said, frankly, like, the name itself, Adventure Conqueror King, is a male power fantasy. Like, you know, I'm
Correct.
not interested
Yeah.
in anything. And I was like,
accidentally based.
I was kind of taken aback, but then I was like, yeah, no, you're actually right. Like, I totally get that, right? I totally get it. It's
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nick has said previously that if you want to have, you know, a larger pool of female gamers, that game has already been invented. It is called Vampire the Masquerade.
No, for sure. For sure.
Which is pretty much been bared out in our experience.
I mean, we played my alternative to Vampire the Masquerade was Cyberpunk, but we had we had Cyberpunk 2020, and then we had female players, and I cleverly came up with the idea that you got bonus experience points if you dressed like a Cyberpunk character. And so for the female players, they took that to mean it was like Halloween. You know, like Halloween, you're like, I'm a teacher, but sexy. I'm a nurse, but sexy, right?
Right.
So then it was like, I'm an assassin, but sexy.
Yeah.
Like the guys were, you know, and we're like all 16-year-old boys, and they're like, this is the best campaign you've ever run.
Macris, you genius.
Yes. Well played, Macris.
Nice.
So it was, that kept me entertained for many years in high school. You know, it was funny because I was like a giant dork by day, and then like on the weekends, most of my players were college students. We used to run on the Allegheny Community Campus with some of my brother's friends. And so it would be like all these, you know, over the top outfits with like these college girls, and, you know, and me being like, wow, I rolled a hit, you know? Oh man.
Hell
crazy.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I think your point about like the Domains at War section of the rules, and the point you made about having fully integrated like communication between different styles of play. The game can operate at multiple levels, at different levels of like magnification, but they all talk to each other. They're not what would you say, existing in isolation.
That's right.
And I think that's a big part of my interest for ACKS II. I really want to put it through its paces. I want to experience it. But
you want to put the books into the box.
Into the box.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, it's
exactly.
actually been it makes it really hard to market the game, honestly, because if you just superficially play a first level character without really knowing the rest of the system, you're like, you know,
it doesn't do anything different. Yeah,
it doesn't do anything different. Yeah, and a lot of the changes are subtle, or only become obvious over time. Like the cleave mechanic is a minor mechanic at first level, but by the time you're 9th level, you're Achilles. And it's made it really challenging sometimes to market the game. Like there's still people. I mean, literally, like I've now written. If you tally it all up, I've written 2 million words of ACKS material. So it's something like 100 times larger than BX. And yet people will still say like, oh yeah, it's just he copied it from BX. I'm like
come on.
BX is this thick.
Right.
But
gosh.
You know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, with you giving all of the tools in the dungeon journal that the Judge's Journal.
Yeah.
We're talking a lot about dungeons, but these are all the tools that you've used. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. To make the Auran Empire, you're giving the creation kit.
Yeah, you're
giving the mod community.
Yeah, you're giving the mod tools. You're exposing the algorithm of how you create monsters and classes and spells. Yeah, it's Can you tell us a little bit more about this, about the rules for creating spells, for creating monsters, classes, magical items, and what was
like these are the things that get me excited when I'm playing in any game, and they often get pushed to the wayside or hand waved, like spell creation rules, especially. Like that should be the most obsessive thing that you are interested in as a wizard. You know?
Sure.
This is another thing where I'm not sure people realize, like the level of consistency that the game has since you have used all these rules to build the entire thing, that if you're building your own campaign, you're going to be able to make something essentially like skip all of the work that you did
Right.
on this, and have for lack of a better word, balanced game. Something that's going to have pieces that fit together, and nothing that is like absurdly overpowered or falls completely flat on its face.
That's right. That's right. There's certainly, you can make spells that aren't as good or whatever, but yeah. So I'll talk about the spell design system because that's one of the most popular. So it was reverse engineered from the existing corpus of D20 spells. And I sat down and I split them up into different schools, and then I tried to reverse engineer and figure out, well, if this spell does this much damage and it has this much of a range and this much of an area of effect, and this in its 3rd level, and this spell does this in its 4th level, and 2 of the 3 variables are same, then it's got to be this 3rd variable is what's causing the change. So now we know that range of 180 is a 1.1 modifier, but range of 240 is a 2 modifier, whatever, right? And that literally took months of effort to do, to sit there. And I had this huge spreadsheet, and I'm like tracking, and, and it was so funny was one of my friends now runs an AI company. He was like, this would have been a really good project for AI because they could have reverse engineered this. And I was like, and I was like, oh, yeah, that would have been really good. He's like, how did you create this? And I was like, by hand. He started laughing. So anyway, so now we have the system. And so you have your blast spells, your death spells, your wall spells, enchantments, illusions. For each spell, you pick an effect, which has a base cost, 5, 10, 15. You pick a duration, which modifies the base cost. You pick a range, modifies the base cost. A target modifies the base cost, duration modifies the base cost. And then there's like modifiers that can stack on top of the modifiers. So you're like, target any creature, but then creature must have 5 hit dice or below, right? Or range 180 feet, but target must be able to see you or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that lets you. So then you build the spell. And for every 10 points of cost, it's a 1st level spell, 2nd level spell, 3rd level spell. But what you can also then do is your character can engage in magic research. And by doing magic research, you can create more powerful spells at a lower level. So you could create a 3rd level spell that actually has the power of a 5th level spell by doing magic research. But and that's how the esoteric spells came about. That's like the idea behind the esoteric spells. But the risk is that the magic research is very risky, and you can accidentally, destroy your soul or blast yourself into another plane of existence, or, whatever, tear apart the laws of reality if you screw up a major magical research project. And then, of course, to do all magic research projects, you need to have special components or divine power or arcane power from various sources. You have to have money. And so it's both mathematically integrated into the game in that I use the system to build the spells in ACKS that I've given you to use to build your spells in ACKS. So it's mathematically integrated into the game system, and it's also diegetically integrated into the game world through the economy and the magic research and all of that. Yeah. So that system is really fun. There's also a class creation system, which is really popular. You basically build your class from slotting out different values. This guy's arcane 3, thief 1, or whatever, which then give you certain trade-offs and benefits. You purchase class powers with them. You can do trade-offs. So you can be like, instead of having a class power at 1st level, I'm going to have a class power at 3rd level and 11th level, or at 6th level and 8th level, or whatever. And so that's how you can get characters who get unlocked powers as they level up. And so you can take these trade-offs if you're not as powerful early on, but you're more powerful later, et cetera, et cetera. And there's really no limit to what you can do with the class system. I've seen people make some really amazing character classes. We have one book, Barbarian Conquerors of Kanahu, and the guy just went to town and he used the race creation system to make like bug men and gecko men and all this great stuff. And then he made all these, he's got like aliens and like half aliens and like gecko men breeders and just crazy stuff. So,
and that supplement is essentially a different campaign setting. Is that
different
correct?
Campaign setting? Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the idea. It's like a Bronze Age world, but that's like being explored by space aliens, and there's dinosaurs and all sorts of crazy shit. Yeah. It's really fun.
Nice.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, with Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that that kind of fits in. I read recently Arbiter of Worlds while I was on a plane, and this all kind of is people, have said that this is going to be the Judge's Journal is going to be kind of like sitting next to the AD&D DMG as a resource for game masters. And I really enjoyed Arbiter of Worlds and your approach to actually building out a setting as a game master, and the fact that that's included in the Judge's Journal and it being next to all of these rules for creating the classes and everything like that. It's going beyond just here's how you create your fantasy world. It's like, here's how you create your fantasy game, which is really awesome. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you developed the kind of top down, come up with this high level concept, zoom in, where you got inspiration from that. And if there were things that possibly if there's something in the AD&D DMG that you were like, Gygax got it wrong. Like,
right. Well, so if you go back and you look at the early era, there was this tension between what people called Gygaxian naturalism, which was, Gary's actuarial tables of random illnesses and, monsters by temperature and climate and things like that. So this Gygaxian naturalism was in tension with this sort of gonzo, anything goes, we'll roll it up on the fly kind of vibe. And I decided I wanted to lean into Gygaxian naturalism, right? Like I wanted to be able to have a setting that could be truly coherent. The problem is that you're like, okay, well, in order to simulate the whole world, you have to build a whole world, and nobody has the time to build a whole world, right? It's that whole map territory problem. So top-down zoom in was my way of solving that. And the idea was that the closer it is to what the players will experience, the more detail there should be. And then the further away it is from what the players experience, there's less. But it's got to all be structured like a pyramid with the top guiding what comes below, so that that's what enables you to maintain coherency and consistency. And ideally, then once like you've got your pyramid, and you're like, okay, well, now if the players want to go over here and ask a question, well, you could be like, all right, well, given all this stuff up here, now I can actually kind of come up with a logical abduction of what that means. So, and that kind of came about trial and error of creating my own campaigns over the various years and doing everything wrong and making all like, I've done the railroads, I've done the GM playing favorites, like all those mistakes. I've made them all. So some people have found that the top-down method is still too much work for them, and they would prefer just a pure bottom-up, here's your castle, starter town, dungeon, go. And ACKS plays like that. You could literally just be like, we're just gonna start outside a dungeon and start playing ACKS, and I'll build it as we go. You can do that. But for those who want more, those. And the way I think about world building is in many ways the way I think about painting miniatures for Warhammer, right? Like Warhammer is fun as a game. But Warhammer is also fun as an excuse to deploy your amazingly hand-painted Ultramarines, right?
Yeah.
And the game is more fun if both sides have really beautiful miniatures and really beautiful terrain. And I feel the same way about a really consistent game world, right? Yeah. You don't have to have it. You can absolutely enjoy the game, with where Captain Fried Chicken is attacking, the Empire State Building in the land of Camelot, and you could do it. But I feel it's more fun.
Not in this group.
Yeah, not at our table.
Table, you're like, you're out of here.
Yes. You're under arrest now.
Yeah, but like the Bro SR guys, for instance, they love ACKS and they use it for a lot of their campaigns. But they take like a very, they take a zero prep approach. They're not that focused on creating backstories and consistency and coherency. What they're interested in is the crunch of the mechanics, and that's fine. Like, my whole principle as a designer is that you're paying me to do the work. So therefore, I'm going to do the work. I'm going to write the
Right.
rule for you. I'm going to have the data for you. I'm going to have the table for you. You don't have to use it, but if you want it, it's there. Right. I hate when I buy a product and it's like, you know, it has like this really cool room, and then it's like, it's left to the GM to decide what this magic fountain does. And I'm like, well, why did I pay you $9.99 on Drive-Thru RPG? I could have put a fountain in a room that I didn't know what it did myself, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm the opposite of that. I would prefer to you know, deliver more and have people not use some parts than deliver less and have them be frustrated because it's not there.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah,
we take it a super chat. A question here though for you says, if I can get, my eyes are terrible. Are proficiencies modular in ACKS II? Would other aspects of the game still work fine if you wanted to run a game without them entirely?
So they're less modular than they were in ACKS I, just because I've added some more mechanics to make them more interesting. What I think you would probably want to do if you wanted to run them without using proficiencies is you'd probably just pick a few of the most common proficiencies and just assign them on a fixed basis to all characters of a particular class, and then not worry about the proficiency system. So for instance, you could be like, you know what, we're just going to give all the explorers the land surveying proficiency, and just not worry about it, right? Or the alternative is that they can lean into using specialists to fill up the areas where their characters might have otherwise had proficiency. So your character doesn't have alchemy proficiency, so he can't identify this potion. So that just means he needs to go see the alchemist in town. And that's actually where the proficiency system came from, was I wanted to be like, well, what makes an alchemist, right? Is he a class? Well, no, he's not a class. He's something else. So the proficiencies were created to explain what D&D specialists were and how they got their powers. And then secondarily, then they became this idea of we could also use proficiencies as an exceptions-based mechanic here and there to let you do a little something cool that the rules otherwise don't let you do. So like in ACKS, you can't shoot into melee, right? Like you're not allowed to shoot an arrow into a melee combat. If you have precise shooting, you can, but now it's at a -4 penalty. And there's no like huge feat chains where you're like, well, I took precise shooting at first level, so therefore at third level, I'm going to be able to take missile focus. You know, there's none of that.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's pretty modular. So I would say less modular than ACKS I, more modular than 3.5.
Okay.
And if you had to say like what of the things that have changed from ACKS II to ACKS I, what was, looking at having had ACKS I be out for, you know, more than a decade, what was the one area where you look back and you were like, I got this wrong at the beginning? Was there one like thing that bothered you?
Thieves. Thieves bothered me. I felt like I didn't do them justice. You know, they were basically just your same old BX thieves, and it was often not fun, right? You're like, oh, I failed to pick the lock. I guess I can try again next level, guys. Well, don't worry, I got it. Don't worry, I got it. I just cast knock. Okay, well, why am I even here? I have a 10% chance of succeeding, right? Like it was. So that really bummed me out. The other thing with ACKS I that I fixed is that I had accidentally created quantum superpositions in combat. Because you would have the situation where you could have simultaneous initiative of multiple characters at the same time, and they're all fighting. So let's say we're all simultaneous and there's 10 of us, and I kill Bob. And so now I get to cleave onto Jim. But Jim, meanwhile, has killed Steve, and he gets to cleave onto me. And you're like, well, who actually killed who first? And in what order does this occur? And you could get to like these really weird situations where like somehow the guy, like he quantum tunnels to the other side of the battlefield on cleaving, and then they're like, how did this, you know? Anyway, I fixed that. That was a really big oversight on my part. I hadn't done enough playtesting to catch it, or I wasn't a good enough designer at the time. But I fixed it now. Yeah. So I would say those are the two: thieves and quantum superpositions in combat.
Yeah, that's kind of a cool flaw to put in your game, though.
Idea for a new class. The quantum superpositionist. And I mean, on that note, we're talking a lot about what are the tools in the toolbox going to let you do, and I want to get your thoughts on third-party creations in a moment. But first, before I forget it, we've talked many times. We're very much in favor of a strong, solid setting. Where can we find more about the Auran Empire?
Oh yeah, is there like a dedicated
like campaign setting book? Is that coming?
There is an Auran Empire primer, most of which has actually already been included into the revised rulebook as an appendix, so it's like built in. The rest of the information is scattered about. So in the ACKS series of modules, there's information revealed, various issues of axioms. So like I've released, the cosmology, the zodiac signs, the horoscopes, different classes, different races, etc. So there is not currently a consolidated Auran Empire boxed set of the sort you had with Dark Sun and things like that. There probably needs to be. It's something I've always wanted to do. It's just always been the case that I've been caught up on other projects.
You've been too busy writing 2 million words.
Yeah. But it feels like there's enough interest in it at this point that I could probably justify it as a project and do pretty well with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I would absolutely back.
At 100%.
Like, I love, like Nick said, like we are very much drawn to settings and not always having the amount of time that I would like to build my own settings. It's really great having a pre-made thing that is very well thought out and very evocative. And I actually think it's a kind of a problem with a lot of fantasy games for people who haven't run these before. If like someone just picks up, the player's handbook for 5e or, really any previous edition, it's basically like generic fantasy world, there's nothing there to go on. And so it's a lot of times having a great setting can just be a lot of heavy lifting done for you, because you can just pick up the little seeds of interest in it. And from there, a full game can be born much easier than.
And it can convey the stuff that the mechanics themselves can't always convey. Yes, particularly with regard to, the more, I guess, esoteric, aspects of genre, right? This is, a delicate touch is sometimes all you need, but an implied setting, at the very least, I think is generally beneficial.
Yeah, I know like mechanics do kind of imply setting, and it's nice when
they do.
It's nice when the explicit setting and the implicit setting actually gel together.
Which doesn't always happen.
That's a huge complaint of mine.
Yeah.
Right. When the explicit and the implicit settings don't jive. Like great example would be some of the early first edition Robotech, where you can watch the comic and they'll use a GU-11 to gun down a battle pod, but then you try and actually do that in that, you're like, oh, I did 8 mega damage and it has 50. I guess we'll finish this off 6 rounds later, right?
Yeah.
That's like a huge pet peeve of mine, is when the extrinsic and intrinsic settings don't match up. I find in general, most games have one of two types of settings. So they either have an absolutely amazing setting that I enjoy reading, but could never convince my players to use, like Numenera or Tecumel or things like that, right?
Yeah.
Or they have a setting that is basically America in the 21st century, but you're dressed up in fantasy clothes. And I get why that is, and I don't begrudge someone who wants to play that, but there's just a real dearth of accessible. There's just a real shortage of it, like accessible, but plausible and historical game settings. And that's what I like, so the way Pendragon did, or the original Oriental Adventures with its attempts to model different periods of Japan, and Kozakura and things like that. Like that's what I'm into, much less than like the current Rokugan or things like that.
And so speaking, we've talked about at least one other campaign setting that's been released for ACKS. I understand that you're looking for some sort of an open license for third-party creators to be able to make content for ACKS, ACKS compatible content, rather. And what if you had basically your ideal vision for how the third-party ACKS market evolved? What would that look like to you?
Oh, I mean, my intent is to have some sort of an open license in place. I'm not going to use the orc license for reasons I could go into if you're interested, but I'm going to use a different one. And then my intent is that there will be a free open game license to use the mechanics. There will be a compatibility license to be able to say compatible with ACKS, and then there will be some sort of Auran Empire license where you can play in the setting, and then there's like a royalty share. So I don't expect it to be a particularly punitive royalty share. It's more just for protection of the trademarks and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. But I would love to see more third-party support for ACKS. I mean, I've opened up the toolbox so much. The whole hood of the game is open and exposed, and someone could absolutely use it to create an awesome setting filled with custom classes and custom spells, and it would be like a totally different game, but except it would be the same game, right? It would be fully compatible. So I would love that.
Nice.
So I guess my ideal ecosystem would be, I mean, if we're wishful thinking, right? It's like Hasbro unfortunately goes bankrupt and is purchased by Chinese investors who don't understand tabletop games and shut them down. And, ACKS accidentally becomes the world dominant player, and, millions of people are creating third-party modules for it. But I don't think that will happen. But
well,
never know.
I wouldn't. I don't know. Things have been weird the last couple of years.
Yeah.
No, that's
like anything is possible.
At this point, there is literally nothing I could read on the news that would surprise me. Like, if I woke up tomorrow and like CNN said, "We're here live with the Illuminati, where they're using their space lasers to deal with the Chinese-controlled lizard people," I would be like, "Oh, yeah, I read that on 4chan. That
sounds
tracks."
about right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Nothing could surprise me.
The number of timelines that have diverged, and somehow we've still managed to stay on the funniest one.
Right.
Yeah. It's just genuinely like, Yep. I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks that, because I feel like the way the world is, you either have to laugh about it or cry about it. It's
right. I mean,
or shriek into the void.
Or shriek into the void.
Or shriek into the void. Those are your three options.
Those are your three options, and one of them is great.
Yeah.
and the other two are absolute misery.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, what did you say you did or didn't want me to tell you my thoughts on Orc?
Oh yes, well, I would love to hear that.
Oh yeah, so I was early on a huge supporter of of Orc, and really wanted that license to be successful. Felt Wizards of the Coast really engaged in some terrible, perfidious treachery.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the community decided to go in a direction I don't love, which is that the premise of the Orc license is that everything mechanical is open, full stop. And the only thing you can protect as protected content is essentially art and fluff. And that frustrates me, because I think it's part of a larger trend in our industry where art and fluff get all of the attention, and most people don't even really, like, when they review a game, you hear about how beautiful the art is and the lush story, and like nobody actually understands how the game mechanics work. Nobody plays it to see if it's a good game that actually functions. And game designers tend to get, pretty short shift. Like, Larry, if you think about, imagine two games, right? One of them is the best designed RPG on the planet, but it has crappy art. And the other is a crappy RPG, but it has the best art that's ever been released. Which of those is going to have a $200,000 Kickstarter, right?
Yeah.
So I felt like the Orc license, by positioning all game mechanics are automatically open content, was kind of a slap in the face to crunch heavy developers like me. And in their FAQ, like literally one of their FAQ questions is, "I'm a crunch heavy developer, who creates a lot of, monsters and magic items, and I don't want them to be open." And they're like, "Well, you shouldn't use Orc then." And I'm like, "Okay, well,
okay.
I guess I won't use Orc then." So
goodbye.
Anyway, I'm bummed that that's the route that they went. I don't think they had to. I still support them for at least doing something, right? Like they stood up and they did something, and I respect them for that. And I told Eric Mona that much. I really respected their efforts. Just my needs were not the needs of the majority of people. So
Right.
Yeah.
So, if not orc, likely. So it sounds like with the kind of protection that you would want on this, Creative Commons is probably not the course that you would take, correct?
No, I don't intend to use Creative Commons. It'll probably be the closest I've seen right now is a license called the ELF license.
Mhm.
That seems to be pretty good. It's very similar to the old OGL, just without the deauthorization possibilities. Frankly, like if someone just took the text of the OGL and said it was irrevocable, that was all that was really needed.
Yeah.
And all Wizards had to do was say, we've released a new version that includes the word irrevocable, and the whole controversy would have ended. The fact, and this is a key point that not a lot of people have made, but the fact that Wizards chose to release part of their mechanics onto Creative Commons rather than just say that they would make the OGL irrevocable reveals that they eventually intend to revoke the OGL, because there was no other reason not to do it.
Oh yeah, completely.
And so anyone who thinks that they can continue to use the OGL is a fool. You will get fucked.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. No, I can.
This is a temporary setback for them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's also the other thing is people kind of go after WotC for this, but TSR was notorious for suing people, like all the time, like extremely protective and very vindictive. So this is not exactly new, even for the legacy of the company of that company in particular.
No, that's for sure.
The curators of Dungeons and Dragons.
For sure.
Now, my understanding is that the 5.1 SRD is in Creative Commons, and that is irrevocable.
Yes.
But they are maintaining the OGL in parallel, and
That's
they,
correct.
like you said, they will eventually fuck you at some point if you use that.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, well, only the 5.1 SRD is in, whereas, well, what about the 3rd edition? Which was an amazing game that had time. Well, no, that's not Creative Commons. I mean, we all know why they're doing it. They want to be monopolists. They want to establish market power and create a walled garden. They're not even trying to hide it. They literally will say it on their investment calls, like, we're trying to create a walled garden and exploit and make more money from game out. So like, I feel like, and this is where I part ways with Ayn Rand, right? But I feel like if you're the inheritor of like an important cultural icon, I feel like you have a certain obligation to like maintain that. And so it breaks my heart that they're like moving away from publishing tabletop books, right? You just know in 50 years D&D is just going to be another video game brand.
Oh yeah, I mean that's what they would want.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I made my peace with D&D being dead. I think a long time ago.
A long time ago.
But it's still it's extremely because a lot of people will get angry even about more recent WotC products that come out. They're not necessarily selling as well, but there's maybe this extra cultural stuff that's being added in that people don't like. But the products themselves are also just not very good anymore.
No.
And people continue to buy them and then complain about it. And it's like at a certain point, you do have to kind of just
accept that it's dead.
Accept that it's dead, and it still bothers me. I don't like the fact that things that I liked and these great cultural icons are being damaged and destroyed is extremely frustrating. And I do wish those people to have horrendous slapstick comedy things happen to them in their lives. Step on a rake and get hit in the face or whatever. But I think a lot of people waste an enormous amount of energy focused on that when they could either make something better or simply open Google and say what's an alternative to D&D and you'll find lots of games.
This is the thing, right? I mean this is happening with all aspects of sort of nerd culture, all the franchises, all your favorite ones. They're dead, and I would argue, even if the message it wasn't being put forth so loudly, you said the products are still lesser than they were. And if there was no WotC tomorrow, you still can't bring the dead back to life. I don't think what was can ever be again.
Mhm.
Even if whoever you think is responsible for, being a poor tender of this beloved thing, even if they were gone, it wouldn't be that way, and I don't think it can be. Certainly you can't force it. Maybe something organic can happen. So make something new.
Yeah.
Like be at peace. Let go.
Yeah.
Not everything
Have you
has
guys
to be. Go ahead.
have you guys read my article, The Spoliation of Pop Culture?
No, but that sounds right up our alley.
Yeah.
So it's an article I wrote a while back, and it references the ancient Roman concept of spoliation, which is the idea that when you conquer an enemy, you take its icons, its temples, its altars, and you take them and repurpose them and make them your own.
Yeah.
And so then in the next generation is worshiping your gods, right?
Yeah.
And my sense is that what we're seeing right now is the spoliation of pop culture, like the culture war.
Yeah.
You know, it's ongoing, but one side has pretty clearly gotten the upper hand, and they are doing exactly what every victor has ever done in human history, which is spoliating the spoils of, of leveraging the spoils of the vanquished and repurposing them to their own methods. And, just as when the Muslims captured Constantinople, they turned the Hagia Sophia into a mosque, right? It's the same thing that Disney is doing with its characters and things like that. I mean, not making them Muslim, but they're making them, they're realigning them to their current cultural values. Yeah. And it's an altogether natural phenomenon that doesn't make it any less painful to experience if you're watching it happening. Like, I'm sure that the Orthodox that used to pray in the Hagia Sophia were pretty upset about it too. But it just is what it is. And so our alternative is, one, we can go along with it. Two, we can read old works. Or three, we can create new works that match our own values. And I choose three.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
100% the way to go.
Yeah.
The only way to go
in
the long term.
And this is the thing, like the meme of, like, we have to go back, we have to return. You cannot return to a world that no longer exists.
That's right.
And it's not even necessarily that it's always, the triumphant march of evil, it's just that things change. Like the fundamentals of the way we live now, and with the creation of the internet, it is so drastically different from the time that I was even a child.
Yep.
That there's no way that you can replicate the experience, or even the same social experiences that were previously. It's like you have to leverage what you have now. It, like in the Nietzschean sense, it's like, you need to become powerful,
Yes.
like, and not dwell and draw on simply, like, looking back at our nerd heritage of, like, how great it once was. I still represent that. It's like, no. Forge the new path.
That's right.
And obviously that doesn't mean throw away everything that came before you. Like that.
Right.
We're not wiping the slate clean and
year zero, man. We're wiping.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
The new nerd, that's not it at all. But
new Soviet nerd.
Yeah, exactly. We have the technology.
Exactly.
But it's but I don't know. It's just that you have to focus on making new things, and the other thing is, this is, I think, with something like WotC, like, we're never going to see another good formal version of Dungeons and Dragons.
No,
the ship has sailed, and if you are sad about that, you should mourn the death of that. But you do not. When you mourn someone and then you put them in the ground and you bury them, you don't continue to live inside the house with the corpse,
right?
And pretend as though nothing's changed.
That's correct.
And it should be a call to you to recognize what you once loved doesn't exist anymore. Mourn it and ask yourself, what are my tastes? What do I believe?
Right.
What do I like, and why? And let me try and live that way and create that way going forward, in a way that, by definitionally, the world is different. It will be different, and maybe it will be great.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna wait until they roll out their AI dungeon masters, and then I'm gonna be like, they're more machine than man now. Twisted into evil.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. The problem is that AI dungeon masters might end up being better than most actual dungeon masters.
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah.
The bar is pretty low in some circles.
In some circles, yeah. If you've been at
Yeah,
like
that's
con
true.
games or anything,
No, for sure. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
rough out there.
It is. Well, you know, being a GM is really freaking hard. Like,
Yeah.
It is.
you know, we try and downplay it because we want people to be GMs and there's a GM shortage, but like, let's not kid ourselves, right? You need verbal skills, math skills, social skills,
Yeah.
emotional intelligence, normal intelligence, you know, knowledge of history, knowledge of weapons. Like, it's, you know, it's basically like, okay, well, learn how to do everything. Okay, now you can be a GM.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I like it, because it puts me in a flow state because of its high demand on all aspects of the
definitely.
mission. But it's, you know, it's exhausting. Like, I GM for 5 hours and I'm beat. I'm like, woo.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
Yeah.
I know.
That's how you know it's good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly the same. This is the thing when people are saying they play like 8 hours, you know, 9 hours. Like I'm like, how? Like my brain is melted at 4. You know,
when I was 18, 19 at West Point, we used to play from noon till 1 a.m. So about 13 hours a day on Saturdays.
Wow.
But we were 18, 19 years old. We were at the peak of physical fitness because we were doing PT 5 times a week. And we would literally each go through a 2-liter bottle of a Mountain Dew each.
Yeah.
So, you know, the amount of caffeine that was and sugar that was being ingested was enough to, like, you know, you could feed in a small African country with it.
Right.
So, it was, and I've tried to do similar in my older age, and like around age 40, my body was like, you can do a 6-hour session. And at 45, it was like, how do you feel about a 4-hour session? So, you know,
Yeah.
can't do it. It's for the young.
It's but it's something I will never give up, and I will continue to do until I'm very bad at it. And should have
Right.
stopped many years ago.
I know I'm going to end up in a nursing home, and I'm going to like
Right.
wheel in, and you know they're all going to be sitting at the table and be like, "Hey, any of you guys ever played ACKS?"
I refuse.
I'm going to live long enough to see myself become the villain.
Yeah, exactly. I refuse to quit when I should.
Right, exactly. You'd be like, roll dice. Oh, those are my dentures. Sorry.
Yeah.
You know, it's gonna be great.
It's crazy though, because I've been DMing. You know, I started DMing basically. Like I played. My brothers allowed me to play one time maybe when I was too young, and they were not having it after that. My brother told me, "You can play with me after you've read the AD&D Second Edition Dungeon Master's Guide twice." And to this day, I've never played with him. But I gave it a try. But it's something that I've been doing for so long that I forget how intimidating it must be for someone who's never run these games, or who's never even played. The idea of just like getting your friends together and being like, "I'm going to run this session." It's a lot.
And your examples are usually so poor.
Yeah, I know. Oh gosh, I know. And you've got all these YouTubers giving you like this, like really non-advice at best,
anti-content.
In many cases, very bad advice. So it is wonderful that you have such incredible tools with depth and very clearly written too. This is the thing I very much appreciate about this. The first edition DMG is very interesting. But it is written in the most nonsensical way possible. Like there's no organization. Like it's
right.
But you stumble across these things that are just like genius. Yeah, exactly. And I was about to say in contrast, but not in contrast. In contrast to the writing style, ACKS is so clear that there's really not any room for confusion on things. And like.
I think that's more true of ACKS II than it was true of ACKS I. There were a few places in ACKS I where I sort of relied on some natural language in places I probably needed more technical writing. And I've paid for that with thousands of direct messages over the last 12 years. People being like, on page 74, what did you mean? Yeah, I'm just like, oh. So I've really made strong efforts for ACKS II to be both enjoyable to read, but also like technically based, right? like not ambiguous. So
yeah, it's even from what I've been reading in ACKS I, though, it is, to me, to my reading, it has not been it is not ambiguous, and I appreciate that. Yeah,
that's very kind. Thank you.
And yeah, I am so excited. I can't wait to just get the PDFs, the artless PDFs. Just give me the technical document when the Kickstarter's over in a few days.
Yep.
Very, very excited to get that.
Yeah, we're like what, 5 days, 6 days out at this point, and then like a week for the money to show up, and then they get sent out. So it's going to be. I mean, I'm really excited about it, right? Because it's my magnum opus, and it's going to go out to like almost 2,000 people, and So
and the what, have you crossed the $300,000 line today? It looks like
did,
you're about to.
And then I uncrossed it because some people canceled. I think there's some people trolling me a little bit.
Yeah, that happens.
Which is fine,
I have a friend of mine is a writer, did a Kickstarter many years ago, and I remember he crossed, and he writes in politics, and so he crossed his goal, and people started being like, "Oh yeah, he crossed his goal." He's like, "Stop posting." He's like, "I'm not sure." He's like, "People are gonna." I was like, "I think people are just trying to sink the project. They're gonna undo their pledges."
Yeah, and that's like a real thing. So
yeah.
Well, I'm getting the signal that it's dinner time here at the Macris
Yes, I got to wrap up as well. But thank you so much again for stopping by and giving us your time and talking about ACKS. I hope you're always invited back to talk to us. And
I'd love to come back and talk Ascendant with you guys. That would be
fun. Absolutely.
Yes. Fun, so
and just have a wonderful night. And everybody, if you haven't, if you somehow have not backed ACKS, go back it now. And don't sleep on the poplar wood slipcase.
That's right.
All right, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.